Stephen Paul Jobs, yes that is his real name, was an incredible visionary who transformed the computer, mobile and music industries. He single-handedly brought Apple back from the dead and transformed it into one of the richest and most influential companies in the world today. But here's some things you might not know about Steve Jobs and Apple. Steve had amazing attention to detail. One day he called Google to tell them the yellow gradient in their O wasn't quite right. Steve persuaded PepsiCo president John Sculley to become Apple's CEO in 1983 by telling him, "Do you want to sell sugared water all your life, or do you want to change the world?" The irony is, John Sculley later fired Steve Jobs from Apple in 1985. But Steve Jobs claimed that being fired was the best thing that ever happened to him, because it led to the most creative period of his life. During Jobs' time away from Apple Computer, he was a busy bunny. He started a brand new computer company called Next, and bought a small, but soon to be large, animation studio called Pixar. Pixar later went on to strike a game-changing deal with Walt Disney, and created the legendary Toy Story. Next was eventually bought by Apple, and Jobs returned to Apple in 1996. Jobs was obsessed with the quality of design. On his deathbed, he refused to wear his oxygen mask because he didn't like its design. Apple sell approximately 10 iOS devices every second, and that's not even including their Mac range. Apple Computer was started by two college dropouts, Steve Jobs and his buddy Steve Wozniak. They launched a company from Steve's family garage in 1976. Apple's factory in China, where iPhones are manufactured, employs 230,000 people. There have been 18 suicides at the plant. Suicide nets are now in place to prevent any more employees from taking their own lives. The very first Apple logo showed Isaac Newton sitting under a tree with an apple about to fall on his head. Apple made the very first mass-market digital camera, called the Apple QuickTake. It was launched in 1994 during Steve Jobs' absence from the company. It had 0.3 megapixels. The camera was a massive failure, and Jobs removed it from the market upon his return to Apple. The first Apple computer, appropriately named the Apple I, was released in 1976. It cost $666.66. Only 200 were ever made. The third founder of Apple, yes there were three, Ronald Wayne, sold his share of the company in 1976 for a measly $800. His shares would have been worth an estimated $35 billion today. Apple is worth $624 billion. In fact, Apple now has more disposable cash than the entire US Treasury. If the iPad were manufactured in the US, because of the major differences in wages, running costs and manufacturing costs, it would cost a staggering $14,970. Jobs was born to an Arab father. He was later adopted by a middle-class couple, Clara and Paul Jobs. He grew up in California. Steve's first job was a video game designer for Atari. He used the money he earned from Atari to travel to India for a spiritual retreat in 1974. It is rumoured he returned home wearing traditional Indian clothing and had a shaved head. Jobs became a Buddhist. Until next time.